Musicians, have you ever had that feeling deep in your gut that the music industry is rigged against you as an artist? Now listen, I totally get why people feel this way. They look at all the labels exuding power for decades and decades, and then they see the rise of streaming services that have completely, decimated artist profits from the music itself. And so it can feel very easily to most musicians that this whole thing's just rigged against us, right? And I wouldn't say that it's necessarily rigged against us. What if it wasn't rigged against us, but what if it was actually just our failure and that we can change? That's the beautiful news about this, is that if it's not something being rigged against us, it's us being able to step into what we've been trying to do all along, but maybe just haven't had the direction or guidance and knowing what we should do. Once we step into this identity of being a professional musician and own it and know how to go forward with it, the labels and all the kind of things that seem like barriers now will start to dissolve and fade away. So today, I want to share with you that musicians mostly fail not because the industry is rigged, right? But because when you go deep down and you look at the real reasons that people are hesitating, they're feeling doubtful about themselves, they're feeling overwhelmed, it's because they haven't truly addressed the issues between their ears, right? Listen, I know it's easy to point at Spotify, to point at record labels, and to point at all these other things and say, it's AI's fault, it's Spotify's fault. But there's so many things that if we just took internal note of, we could actually start to fix things. So in today's video, I want to share with you the 3 things that I think musicians are being held back from. And musicians are called lazy and they're called entitled. Now, I'll tell you something. I have met lazy, entitled musicians, right? However, I would say that that's not the majority, right? So when we look into this, I think it's a problem of mostly being overworked. I really do. People say, oh, it's because artists don't post enough content. They're just being lazy with their promotion. I've been on the other side of that coin, where I understand the reason that most artists are not posting is because of some kind of laziness. It's because of procrastination, and that's different than being lazy. Procrastinating, comes from this anxiety about the action itself being taken. Not necessarily lazy, which is you have no justifiable reason, and you have no justifiable reason. You're just choosing to do what's comfortable over what you need to do. That's being lazy. Most artists don't fall into that category. What happens is our minds are working overtime. We're sitting there in this state of, I could be working on this, I could be working on this, I could be working on this. And that's what's drowning us emotionally at first that we really need to address. We need to address this fact that because a lot of the responsibility of the modern age of being a professional musician, a lot of the responsibility of growing the actual business is on us now. It's not just on us to write great music. We have to build the business that undergirds the music so that we can actually have a career in it, or at least make some side income that's meaningful. And I want to make a note, some people think that if you're not making $1 million a year from your music that you're not successful. I guarantee you most musicians, if they made an extra $10,000 to $20,000 a year from their music, they would be over the moon elated with joy, right? So I just want to point that out, right? So what happens is, in this day and age, to get to that level of success where we are making $10,000 a year from our music, $20,000, $50,000, or maybe we get up into that 1% eventually one day, but let's just aim modest for the beginning of this. We have to understand that getting to that point is not going to come from the old broken model that used to work, right? We used to rely on things like radio, and listen, there are niche cases where certain kinds of radio can be effective, right? But the old idea of radio, the FM radio, to me, unless you are in the top 1% in the kind of elite club of the music industry, you're most likely not going to make it to that point without substantial financial investment, right? So we need to look at success okay, how do I start taking the actions that fit today's model? Something that, knowing that I'm the musician, I have all this stuff on my plate, there's so much I could be doing. What do I actually focus on? Right? And so that's a really big issue is we're sitting there drowning in the emotion of being burnt out. And we think it's because, oh, there's something wrong with the industry or there's something wrong with me. Really, it's the model. And the beautiful thing is you can change this. That's, I keep wanting to say this, that's the good news of this, is if it's an external thing that we have no control over, then we develop what's called learned helplessness. And this is a really big problem. So in psychology, you think about it like if a rat is in a experiment, right? And they're trying to get out of a tube or a confined space that these people have put them in. After a certain amount of failure, the rat will start to all of a sudden develop this idea of learned helplessness. Like there's no point in trying to get over the wall because there's no solution that will actually get me over that wall. But the point of this is that's how humans will behave in certain contexts too when we've faced repetitive failure over and over and over and over again. So we have a broken model that gets us broken results. And after we've been getting these broken results time after time after time after time, now we start to develop learned helplessness. And that's why you see this group of musicians that other people will point out and say, well, they're just lazy and they're entitled. No, what's happened is they're being overworked in the wrong areas that aren't actually making a difference in their music business. And because of that, they're not seeing results, they're frustrated, and it is a natural psychological thing to develop learned helplessness. But just because it's natural to develop it in the context of getting repeated failure does not mean it's okay to fall prey to it. It means we need to acknowledge that that is what our minds are going to, it's like a hole in the ground we need to step over fundamentally. So just because there's a hole in the ground doesn't mean you got to step in it, right? That's what learned helplessness is like, where we're going to get repeated failures and then holes are going to pop up all over the ground trying to get you to fall into this habit of there's no point in trying to take any effort to solve my situation because it's never ever going to get better. However, if we step over that and we just keep on moving forward, you actually start to get momentum because you don't get stuck in those holes. That'll just hold you there in this, well, there's no reason to move forward because why move forward? Because nothing good's going to happen, right? So many musicians, we need to cleanse our mind of this putrid, toxic behavior and mentalities because that's what's holding us back is this idea that, well, there's nothing I can do. So what I'm going to do is just keep making music and then eventually stuff will figure itself out. No, it will not. I'm telling you this right now. One of the biggest myths, and I talk about this at length in my book, The Musician's Dilemma, shameless plug, right? Is this idea of if you build it, they will come, right? That was in a Kevin Costner movie about baseball. Let's probably not take our life mottos from a fake scenario in a fake, it's a movie, it's not real, right? So yes, you want to build something of value so that when people see it, they do naturally attract and gravitate towards you. But the idea that we're just going to sit in our bedrooms and make music and haphazardly put content out there and we're going to blow up, it's just not going to happen. We have to be more diligent and we can't fall prey to the traps that are ahead of us in this business, especially in the modern age, which is being overworked and then blaming the failures on external forces. Now, again, I don't want you to blame yourself to the point where you're just miserable. That's not helpful either, right? So what do we do in this circumstance? We have to take stock of the actions that actually get results, metrics that matter, okay? So for example, how many people spent time today maybe thinking about different ideas for a potential, live show performance idea, or maybe you sat around thinking about a potential cool piece of content, right? How many people actually sat down with their phone or at their desktop and messaged potential fans on Instagram or Facebook or TikTok even? How many people took the time to reach out to those fans, not in a spammy way where you're just clearly just copying and pasting, but you actually tried to make a connection with a fan? I guarantee you, most people watching this video, the answer is 0 hours, not just today, but probably this past week, or maybe even the past month, and probably longer for some of you. It's okay. You probably are like, whoa, I didn't know I could do that without it just being spammy. I figured no one would even want to respond to me. Again, This is the behaviors that you have been conditioned based on the broken model that people have been feeding musicians for decades now. So we need to really look at it and say, okay, what are the things that actually move the needle? What are the income generating activities that I need to focus on? Now, why is messaging a fan a potential income generating activity? Well, because if you can message a fan, build a connection, build a bond, not just through the messaging, but they know about you now. They're, maybe you're messaging them because they commented on one of your posts. So like you're not just going cold, which you can do, by the way. It's just a whole different strategy. But you look at it as you try to build this genuine connection. And now, whenever you have, let's say, something that you're going to offer up to your fans for them to support you and buy something for you, you've got people who you've built a bond with. This is essential. People think that, oh, I'm not going to be able to sell anything until I have 10,000, 20,000, 50,000 followers. That's not true. By the way, if you think that, you're shooting yourself in the foot, because then you're going to keep pushing the goalpost further and further and further and further away before you actually take action. And by the time you actually take action, what we call the heat length of most fans has died out, right? The heat length is the period of time in which a fan is most, I'm going to say attracted, but I don't mean in a relational way. I mean like in a affinity kind of way, where the fan is most attracted to the music and everything that you've got going on the most for a limited window of time. For some people that are like the diehards that love you, that window of time is going to be like 10 years. But for some people, most people, that window of time is going to be a few months, maybe a year, maybe 2 or 3 or 4 years, and then it starts to fade away. So the point is, if you wait and wait and wait and wait to finally capitalize on this, by the time you actually try to capitalize on it, the fans will not be as ecstatic and excited about what you've got going on as they were when they first discovered you, and you could have offered them something then, and they totally would have bought it, right? So that's how just messaging fans, for example, can lead to it as an income generating activity, because you're getting new fans, you're getting new blood into the business so that it can survive. That's the whole point as a musician. If you're going to become a professional musician, you need an audience, you need a crowd, you need people that like you. And so sometimes we're so focused on the content side of getting people that we ignore the messaging, the fan side of it. And again, content is extremely effective if it's done well. That's the thing though. There's a lot of competition in content. There's not as much competition in the DMs from people that are doing it right. Because most of the artists who get thrown into the spam folder are the ones that are clearly spamming, right? It's just a copy and paste link. So they're not really competition. But if you can message them and get that personal interaction, you're going to be standing out. Because that's not what the majority of musicians are doing. They're focusing on how getting fans through content, because it's a little bit more of a passive acquisition. What do I mean by that? That means, okay, I work on the content and I post the content, but then the content does the work for me, and sort of I can passively get fans from the content. Whereas DMing someone, that's building the bond manually, directly, one-on-one to the fan. And while it's like obviously a less efficient way of reaching people, it is oftentimes a more effective way of reaching people. Notice the difference there. That's a huge thing, is that people often mistake efficiency with effectiveness. Put it this way, if efficiency was all that mattered, spammers would be the richest. Because efficiently, they just copy and paste to millions of people if they've got lists that they've bought, right? So in theory, they're the most efficient out of all of us. They're messaging millions of people directly. However, how effective are they? Almost not effective at all. Everyone knows even people who are in their upper age that just now get onto social media see that and go, I don't think so. Like, nobody falls for it because it's completely ineffective. It's completely crap. Obviously, the services are crap too, so that doesn't help them in any way. But you have to think about it like this. If you can message a fan one-on-one and build that bond, how effective is that going to be? Way more effective than a post that's clearly not for them yet, right? And I say yet because I talk a lot on this channel about when you create content, you really should create content from this perspective that it was made for your fan. However, I know that's not always the case for most artists in the content they've created so far and the fans they've accumulated so far. So the thing to do there is build that bond one-on-one so that it's more effective, it's more potent that way. It's the equivalent of when you're at a live show, the ability to make someone a fan instantly is a lot easier than if you're just making a mass post online, because the personalization, the potency and effectiveness are not there, right? But what's the closest thing that we can do digitally? Because we can't get the same effectiveness and potency as a live performance, so what's the next best thing as far as getting that connection? Well, I think DMing somebody, but not just DMing somebody, go to their messages and drop them a voice memo so they can hear your voice, you saying, "Hey, Allison, thanks for the follow. Really appreciate the engagement and, supporting the music. Is this the first time you've heard of me or have you been listening before?" Right? You drop a little voice memo like that. How many artists are taking time to do that? Not very many. So you stand out instantly. So that's just a couple of things I can show you as far as like focusing more on an activity that's generating fans. I could talk about this for a very long time. But what you got to avoid is this learned helpless, like, well, if my content doesn't work, then that means everything is for naught and that my whole music business is screwed. It's like, no. Sometimes the content game takes a while. I've had clients personally who have worked with me, and for some of them, it took them like a month and a half and they sort of figured out their content deal. But for others, it's taken like 6 months. Why? Because it was testing and reiterating, and sometimes it took them a while to find it. But you know what the best part is? You eventually find it. That's the cool part, right? But it's kind of a long grind. When you're messaging someone directly, you can help expedite that process of building a fan. Again, it's more manual. It requires a little bit more elbow grease. But if you're going to be working on your music business, wouldn't you rather spend an hour messaging people knowing that it was actually getting you closer to your goals than spending an hour thinking and worrying about what you should do, but then never actually doing anything? I guarantee you messaging people will get you further along than that, right? Or even if you spent an hour editing your website. Let me let you in on a little tip. Your website could always be better. It will never be done. There's always an improvement that can be made. So that's an infinite rabbit hole that will just suck down your time and not really move you that much forward in your business, right? So would you rather spend an hour editing the piece of content or an hour messaging fans? Which one do you think will yield quicker bonds with people? I think actually spending the hour messaging them will, right? So I mentioned the problem is not that they're lazy, it's they're overworked, but it's not that they have no capability to work hard. It's just that they're working hard on the wrong things. We're spending hours and hours and hours video editing. This is something I talked to multiple clients with about, of like, please do not spend multiple hours editing videos. You really want to figure out how to make it short and sweet, effective, not just, you want it to be effective for the fan, but efficient for you to create, since we're using these terms, right? So you want your creation of the content to be efficient, but also effective for them to consume, right? Try your best. I mean, I get it. If you really have to create the content and you got a specific idea and it takes an hour to edit it, I kind of get that a little bit. But 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours, please do not do this. I've had clients editing thumbnails for 4 hours, and that hurts my heart because I know that the end of that 4 hours, you feel like you're exactly where you started, because you are. That's the problem with these activities that we focus on as artists. And that's why it's good to have graphic designers, so you don't have to focus on your artwork or your merchandise design. Have somebody else deal with that. You know what I'm saying? Like, you taking 3 hours to design a piece of merch that you never actually end up selling because you haven't actually done the work to build any fan, that's not going to help you. But if you build an audience and then sell to them as you're building the audience, that's something that can work. Because I've seen this problem in twofold. I've seen the artists who have no fans and are not selling anything. I've seen artists who are building a fan base but not selling anything and missing out on sales. But I also see musicians who have no fans and selling their butts off. I'm like, okay, guys, when you're baking the cake, You can't throw the icing in with the raw eggs. We got to do things in the right order, or else it's all going to go to crap, right? And that's the same thing with our music business. If you start trying to hardcore sell things and you literally have no audience, what are you doing? Also, if I can tell you're selling stuff, that means you're most likely selling things on social media, which means you're not selling effectively probably at all. Just as a little side note. There are ways to sell on social media, but the hard pitching, hard selling way is most likely not the way to do it unless you're paying for advertising. Anyway, so that's one of the biggest issues that we've dealt with is being burnt out because we're focusing on the wrong things and developing learned helplessness as a result of doing the wrong things over and over again and getting burnt out. And I just kind of gave you some ideas and some philosophies on what to focus on or how to think about what you're focusing on so that it can get you some results, right? Excuse me. The second thing that we need to really dive into that's important is the identity conflict that many, many musicians are falling into, where when we start to make that jump where we start becoming a professional musician and we were a hobbyist. We hadn't really shared our music with many people and now we're sharing it with people. Or maybe we had shared it, but we kind of just did it like, oh, whatever, and now we're ready to commit, right? When that happens, artists run into a dilemma. They start thinking to themselves, man, I'm a musician. I'm not a X. And whatever they fill in with X usually is a false belief because of the way that the narrative of the word has been introduced to them. So let me elaborate what I mean by that, because some people may be like, what are you talking about? What happens is we're told content, guess what, musicians? You're a content creator. And musicians do not want to take on that identity label because in their head, there's a certain narrative that plays with the word content creator, which means, you're doing fancy TikTok dances and you're hawking bubble machines as an affiliate on TikTok. That's not what a content creator is. A lot of people have the same kind of ideas with the word influencer. They think an influencer is someone who's like, buying fake Lamborghinis and hanging out with, they're paying a bunch of good-looking women to hang around them so they look cool and they're trying to influence you, like to buy their course or whatever. Like, that's the word that comes up when most people and a lot of musicians think of the word influencer, right? However, if we look at those two words, let me ask you a question. Does Taylor Swift influence masses of people? Oh, wow, look at that, she does. What about Metallica? Do they influence masses of people? Oh, you bet your butt they do. So both of them are influencers. And that's really what it comes down to. What it means to be an influencer is to just get masses of people to take a desired action, right? That's influence. Dare I say, that's the same thing as leadership. I mean, think about all the greatest leaders throughout time. Were they influential or not? I think they were pretty influential in getting people to do what they wanted them to do, right? Think of Martin Luther King. I think, think about Jesus. Oh my goodness. Talk about, what year is it? I'll just say that. So when we look at it, there's all this conflict in our identity where we're saying, I'm a musician, not a insert word. But what if being a professional musician meant that you were an influencer to masses of people? What if it meant that you're someone who created content? I've said this before in other videos. Were the musicians who were putting out music videos, were they content creators? Yeah, they were. The content was the music videos. The platform was television channels. That's the same thing. It's just a different form of technology based on our advancement in technology, right? We can't be sitting here putting a specific box around the word content creator and then saying now, anytime I create a piece of content, I'm now this thing. It's not the truth. What if being a professional musician in 2025 and beyond meant, oh, I'm actually a music entrepreneur. That's really what I am. And I like to call music entrepreneurs in this channel. You may have heard this term and you may identify now as one of these, which is a money smart musician, right? Money smart musicians understand how business works, and they understand that if I'm going to operate a music business where I'm going to make a career or some side income from my music, I have to have a business. And because I'm a money smart musician, and you're a money smart musician, hopefully, you understand now that you have to have revenue. And to have revenue, you have to influence masses of people. To even get people to know who you are, you've got to create content and attract those masses of people in, right? So we've got to drop these labels. We feel that by adopting the identity of content creator or influencer, that it's like we're being pulled in multiple different directions, right? That's what's happening. It's like, oh, I'm a content creator. I'm a this, I'm a this. Get rid of that for good. You're just a professional musician. Just like, when you're the male person. I've never been a mailman or a mailwoman, so I have no idea. But let's say you're a mailman, right? Most people think, oh, so your job is, you drive around and put the mail in the box. It's like, sure, yeah, but there's other parts of the job, like, I actually can put the mail into the truck. I take the boxes and stuff out of the truck at the end. I'm using a very simple example. But the job description fits more than just put the mail in the envelope. And you can't sit on, the mail truck or whatever and say, well, if it doesn't involve my arm sticking out the window and putting it into the envelope into the mailbox, then therefore I cannot do it because I'm just a mailman. You see how people would be like, dude, just do your job. Like if the Amazon person's like, listen, I'm an Amazon driver, not an Amazon package deliverer. I drive the car, okay? It's like, no, a part of the job description of being a driver is that you also drop off the packages, right? In the same way, you can't be like, I'm a musician, I'm a professional musician, I just write music. It's like, no. Being a professional musician means you write music, you create content to promote and market it, you have sales systems to sell things to your fans who are now new fans of whatever you got going on. So we can't do this whole thing where we play semantics and say, well, I'm a this, not a this. If you're going to play that game, just be a hobbyist. Just do that. Like if you're going to say, I'm a musician and nothing else, just be a hobbyist. No one will look down on you. No one will say like you're a bad person. Just do what makes you happy in that sense. Just be a hobbyist. However, if you've made that commitment to start earning some income, whether it's $10,000, $20,000 a year to more, hopefully, from your music, well, then you bet your sweet patootie, you better learn how to sell some things. You better learn how to market some things. And, of course, you got to write great music. So we have to adopt the identity. We can't be in denial about this any longer. We have to accept the identity of being now a money smart musician. Okay, say that. I am a money smart musician, because you are. If you start to embrace these principles and start to really take it to heart and know it is true, because we can play the emotional thing all we want. We can sit there and say, well, I wish, it should be, it ought to. But is that the reality that we live in? The reality that we live in is, in this day and age, you can't just be, I just sit in my basement and write songs and then all the rest of the people take care of the business, and I had to do none of that work ahead of time. It's just taken care of me automatically. That's not the world that we live in. And so finally, because we've been in this situation where we've been procrastinating because of our identity, we're sitting there like, oh, I'm not a this, I'm not a that. And so we're not actually going all in on our music business, and we've got this learned helplessness that's developing. We start to have shame. We start to have ego wounding, as they call it. Because we start saying things like, man, this person's my age and they're way more successful than me. Or this person's younger than me and they're way more successful than me. I know this is kind of a funny example, but Colonel Sanders didn't really get Kentucky Fried Chicken going, if I'm not mistaken, until his late 60s. I'm pretty sure the founder of Chick-fil-A was in his mid 40s or mid 50s before he figured it out. I'm just using fast food chains because I'm hungry. But Ray Kroc, he went through product after product after product after product after being a salesperson till eventually finding the McDonald's brothers. And guess what? What they leave out of that movie is that Ray worked without making a single penny for 10 to 15 years. But sadly enough, Hollywood doesn't want to show Ray Kroc not working for 15 years, not taking a penny, because then he can't look like the bad guy at the end of the movie. You know how Hollywood is. We got to have good guys and bad guys in movies, so they got to create these narratives. So, again, I'm not saying these people are perfect. Every human being is flawed. But what we don't understand a lot of times is that it's not about where you are now in comparison to another musician, because the likelihood that y'all's paths are exactly the same is slim to none. Okay? What that means is just because someone is the same age as you, just because someone is the same gender as you, just because someone's in the same country as you, does not mean that you can compare yourself and say, well, I live in the United States, how come I'm not successful? Or I'm a female singer, how come I'm not successful like this person? Or I'm insert characteristic, I'm 32, how come I'm not as successful as some of these 27-year-olds? Whatever walls you want to put in front of yourself, do not do this. Comparison is the thief of joy for a reason, because we're comparing ourselves to people who are not comparable to you. They're not. That's the thing, is like, we can learn from people and try to model the things that are successful, that have worked for them. That makes a lot of sense. But when it comes down to saying my life's journey needs to be the same as this person just because maybe I'm doing the same kind of things or something, that's never going to be the case, no matter what, right? So we can't look at an artist or another musician who's, I know there's certain musicians out there that are maybe in their 40s, they're in their 50s, and I've talked to a few on Zoom calls that are in their 60s that are like, man, it just sucks that I'm at this age and I haven't quite found what I'm looking for success-wise yet. And what I would say to them is like, you will figure it out eventually as long as you don't develop learned helplessness and you actually adopt the identity that you can do this because you're a professional musician, and you start looking at what's working and what's not working. Because then, think about this for a second. If you're aware and you're observant of what's going on in your music business, you will quickly identify what does not work and what does work. And if you continue to do the things that do work for a long enough period of time while abstaining from doing the things that do not work for that same period of time, it is almost impossible for you not to see progress. It's almost impossible because you're figuring out this works, do more of what works. This doesn't work, do less of that. It's so, I say simple. It's not easy. It's simple. Just because something is simplified doesn't make it easy. So build a house in 2 steps. Step 1, build the house. Step 2, walk out the front door. You know what I'm saying? So I get it. There's a lot more nuance to it, but we can't sit there and compare ourselves to everyone to the point where now that's helping us develop even more learned helplessness. Because now we're saying, well, they could do it because they were, and then we start building a narrative. We start saying because they were in a situation where the music industry wasn't rigged against them. Or maybe they're just part of the rigging, and the reason I'm not successful is because I refuse to participate in the rigging. Like we start developing these narratives that when you start digging underneath and you really go deep down, you start to find yourself finding that it's really just that I've been procrastinating, I've been wasting time, I've been spending time on things that don't actually move my music business forward. And if we can start to make those changes and make peace with what is required, and you just focus on trying to get better and better and better every day. Try to get 1 to 2 to 3% better every day. Okay? That's what you need. Just every single day. Get a little bit better. Get a little bit better. Get a little bit better. And as you do this, you will start to see progress. But what's not going to help you is these emotions built up by the old broken model that we've been using. Maybe we've been doing this old model of like trying to sell CDs at shows or whatever, right? Things that just don't really work anymore. Even in the content realm, content stuff is evolving all the time. So there's certain content formats that work and certain content formats that don't work now. Like, it takes us to be aware to go, okay, this is what's required. I can eventually learn how to do this. I can overcome this. But I've got to drop any of this negative crap that's living in my head, preventing me from actually moving forward. So hopefully this video has given you guys some encouragement, some clear headspace to actually move forward in your music business, not held back by what's between our ears and the false narratives that we tell ourselves or that have been told to us, so we can actually start to move forward. So if you did get some value from this video, hit the subscribe button, the notification bell, all that kind of good YouTube-y stuff. And if you'd like some one-on-one help getting some direct marketing systems built into your music business, then click the link that's in the description where you can apply for a free one-on-one coaching call. It's just a free call to figure out if it's a good fit, if we can actually help you in your music business. So if that's something you're interested in, apply to that now. And I look forward to seeing you on another video inside of Musicians Ignite. Take care.